Awesome. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us for part 2 of our TPE Jumpstart series, exploring your options. My name is Kirby R. Gibson, and I serve as the chair-elect on our TPE steering committee. I also serve as the Assistant Director of Residence Education at Michigan State University. We are very excited to have you join us on this, I would say, special edition of Jumpstart series, as it is Throwback Thursday. And we do have a number of some of our alum of the TPE Ambassador and Interns program on our panel to share all of their wisdom and insight with you all. And so before we jump into introductions, wanted to share some housekeeping things with folks. So the first thing being that for those of you all that we ask you all to have your audio on mute, just so we can avoid any feedback that may pop up. You're welcome to turn on your camera, but that's not required. I recognize Zoom fatigue is real out here, or sometimes you just may want to be in your bonnet, and that's okay. This session is being recorded, so just as an FYI to folks. And so we'll be sharing this recording on our various platforms once we're done with this. We also encourage you all to use the chat for questions, comments, thoughts, etc. And should you have something that you want to share anonymously, we ask that you directly send it to Kirsten Fox, who is our TPE director, and she'll make sure that it gets our way. And last but certainly not least, we encourage you all to engage with us on social media. And so in the left-hand corner of the screen, you'll see our handle for our Twitter account, as well as a couple of hashtags that we ask for you all to use. Just sharing some of your insights with folks or anything like that. I know some of the panelists are also willing to share their handles as well in the chat. And so if there's something that's like, whoa, that was just chef's kiss, and you want to give them credit for that, feel free to give them a tag as well. So I'll stop sharing my screen. And with that, we're going to go ahead and jump right into our panelists. And so I'm going to ask our panelists to share their name, their pronouns, their role, where they're at currently, as well as where they went to graduate school. So let's start off with we're gonna go OG. So we're kind of old, Tiffany. So Tiffany, would you like to go first?
Sure, calling us out like that, Kirby. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany Firestone. I use she, her pronouns. I currently serve as an assistant director for the Center for Community Standards at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. And I did my grad work at University of the Pacific in Stockton, California.
Thanks, Tiffany. Fred, you're up next.
2015 in the house, TPE Ambassador Intern. Happy to be here, everyone. My name is Fred Tugas. I use he, him pronouns. Currently serving as the Assistant Director for Student Leadership and Engagement at Virginia Commonwealth University, which is in Richmond, Virginia. And I completed my graduate master's work at Clemson University, and I'm a current doctoral student as well.
Thank you, Fred. Crystal?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Crystal Thibodeau. My pronouns are she, her, and I am currently a coordinator for residence life at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And I did my graduate work. I'm actually a proud double alum. I did my undergrad and grad at NC State University.
Thank you, Crystal. And last but certainly not least, Taradrick.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. TPE intern and alum of 2018. My name is Taradrick Waller, he, him, his pronouns. I currently serve as program coordinator of first year experience in transition and academic growth at the Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. And I did my grad work at the University of Louisville. I'm a recent May 2020 grad.
All right, awesome. Thank you all for sharing. And then just want to open it up because it is this Throwback Thursday, right? So if there are any other TPE ambassadors or alums that are present, feel free to shout yourself out in the comments. Really want to go ahead and honor the community that exists within TPE. And all of us that are present, because I also am a TPE ambassador and intern alum. I was in 2014 with Tiffany, as well as Nick, who's also on the call. So shout outs to this community because it truly has served as a platform to really help us build relationships and navigate the field. So, all right. So without further ado, yes, we do have our own Twitter account. We'll go ahead and jump right on into the questions. So the flow of what's happening, we have a few questions that we shared with the panelists in advance, and then we'll open it up to you all in general for questions. But if anything comes to your mind right away, feel free to add it in the chat. So the first question is, so what were or are important factors that you consider when looking for a job? So whether that be institution type, location, role, responsibilities, etc. And anybody can take it.
I can start us off. I think for me, so one of the first things that I did was I created a spreadsheet and I really sat down and determined like what are my non-negotiables in this job search process. And I'll throw it out there. Salary was one of them. I definitely had a range of what I was looking for, but also I would say location. I was kind of location bound. So I knew that I wanted to find an institution that was in the Southeast region. That was pretty important to me. I don't personally like the cold, so I did not want to go up north. And I definitely didn't want to go to the West Coast because that was way too far away from family for me. So I would say those were kind of the top ones, location, but also institutional type was a thing for me. So public versus private, and the overall student population size too, because coming from NC State, fairly large population, and I wanted to, in my first role, kind of continue that on and be at a fairly large to mid-sized population.
I would echo what Crystal said. For me, was the institutional type, not necessarily, well, location as well, because like one of my non-negotiables. So like, just for context, I was job searching when COVID hit. And so worrying about salary really wasn't on my mind. It was like, I need a job, honestly, truthfully. And so I started my job search process actually in November of my second year. In December, like applying for jobs and different things like that. And then initially getting my role I'm in currently until August. And so once the pandemic had hit in March, like I was right in the middle of doing like on campuses, and a lot of schools were like shutting down and different things like that. And so salary wasn't big for me, but it also was at the back of my mind. But luckily I have a good salary, here at The Ohio State. But some non-negotiables I had to think about was like making sure that I had I was in a city and I was near a major airport or an airport that can give me easy access to get home to family. Being that I am in Ohio, I'm about 15 hours away from home. I'm from Mississippi. And so like just having easy transport, like knowing that I had transportation to get to family whenever something was to arise or like there was a family emergency, I had that access. And then two, the role responsibilities. So I also was a NOTA intern at the University of Alabama. And so I knew I wanted to work in first year's experience working with orientation, transition, and retention. And so I was very intentional about what roles I was looking for. And then of course, attending TPE, where they say that housing is one of those things that, you want to go to TPE for housing. That's certainly not the case. As you can see, like these interns, we were in diverse positions and institutional types. So just knowing what you want to do and sort of some of those responsibilities that you're doing in your current role that can benefit you in your next role, definitely capitalize off of those and just think about, what are some of those non-negotiables, because there are going to be times where you are 14 hours away from home, or there are going to be times where you are location bound. So just definitely think about the role holistically and not just in terms of a salary, if that makes sense.
I will echo everything that everyone has shared so far. I held a lot of privilege of movement and family support when I was doing my job search, and so location was not something that I was too concerned about. Although, let me tell you, when you do live far from an airport, that is a fascinating challenge to pay attention to. Something that I was really looking for, I was in residence life in my grad work, and I was looking for housing and residence life in my first position. Something that I was paying attention to was the community of support in the department and the number of peer positions. Because if you've been in residence life, there's those on-call shifts, on duty shifts, and so knowing the number of people that are sharing that with you, or even just the people that you have as a support when you go through those rough moments, that was a really big piece for me. I wanted a community of support that I could just connect with, vent with, laugh with, cry with. And so, it didn't mean that I had to be at a large institution. Smaller institutions can have larger staff makeup, but that was a very critical thing for me. Something as far as identity-based thought. Is there are certain institutions that have religious affiliations or values or things like that. And so I was paying attention a little bit based on my own personal identities about whether I could be at an institution that required certain realms of thought. I don't think that there's an absolute no to working at any of those. You just have to consider that for you and whether that's going to fit with what you see yourself as a professional.
The last thing that I'll add, I think everyone has given some great pieces there. I was intentionally looking at small institutions. And so for those of you all that are interested in student activities or student union work, student involvement work, those jobs are kind of a dime a dozen, especially if you are looking in locations and that sort of thing. So although I was looking at a small school, when I started my process going through TPE, I applied for every student activities job that was on the TPE, right? Even if it was in the Midwest, which was not within my locations, or it was in a very rural town when I was looking to be in a city. And so I used that as an opportunity to figure out my own values. And I used the TPE process as a way to do that. What I would just expand on what folks have talked about is that as you look at your non-negotiables going down, think about what that looks like as time goes on, right? And so what does that look like? And can salary, is that the thing that could potentially be budged a little bit, right? Is location a little thing that can be budged when you're now getting into July, right? And school's about to start in August, and that the student affairs cycle will start to reset. So all things to think about as you work through non-negotiables. Identity was huge for me as well, and knowing that I was in an inclusive space after being in rural South Carolina for a while, but just thinking about the time-bound piece is just as important.
Thank you all. Would you all be able to elaborate a little bit more on this, like the use of the word non-negotiable for our folks who may not necessarily be too familiar with that, and how you, I guess, to a point that Fred brought up earlier, was try to lighten up a little bit on what those non-negotiables are and essentially get them into the space of them being negotiables?
Sure. So the way that I view non-negotiables are what are the pieces of your life, the way you live, your identity that you need to have in order to live and work in a space that affirms you or that keeps you able to pay your bills. And so there are pieces that you know of yourself that you value and you don't want to give that up, right? And so, do you have student loan debt? Do you have car payments? Are there things that if you add it up, you need to have a baseline payment that you can make every month? And so that's one of those, you need to have that salary that's going to meet that financial need. And then, do you support family? Is there financial need that you have there? there are pieces when I was making those lists where it was what is a non-negotiable, kind of what's a need, and then what's a want and what can I give up. And so salary, you know, if you hear res life, salary is a little all over the place, but there are a lot of random things that will add into that. And so, you know, does the position have a meal plan for 12 months or 10 months? Is there laundry in unit? And so there's those pieces that they're very small, but they're kind of quality of life additions. And so those were things that I considered, like maybe this salary wasn't the highest of the positions I was looking at, but I was going to have a meal plan the entire year. And that's actually a huge financial benefit. So there's those small pieces that I kind of put in my needs list, but that could kind of move out of and move between.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, we all know that well-being is so interconnected, right? And so as you think about what you need financially, as Tiffany talked about, as you think about what you need career-wise, you know, my move to UNC Asheville as the associate director, where I was previously, was because I wanted the opportunity to open a brand new student center. That's what attracted me there. And when you're thinking about that career piece, when things go sideways at a place, what is going to drive you as a non-negotiable, right? That says that this will affirm for me to stay here 2, 3, 4 years. But then thinking about the community well-being piece, someone I think touched on that with the identity question, right? Was that, you know, if things are going sideways at work or things are not going well, what does community look like? And so looking at representation, looking at how young or old a community is, right? Like age median, looking at median salaries in that area. All of those pieces are things for you to consider as you look at well-being holistically.
Yeah, and I would just echo
Go ahead.
exactly
Go
what
ahead.
Fred. Oh, go ahead. I was going to echo what Tiffany and Fred were saying. So like with me in my position, I was very set on like non-negotiables in terms of like responsibilities, because I know where I want to be in the future, where I want to take, you know, my higher education career. And so I was actually in the interview process for my program coordinator position, and then also an assistant director position where I was offered, you know, coming out of grad school. And of course you would think, you know, like, yeah, you should have went with the assistant director position, but in terms of like responsibilities and what I'll be doing in that role, I would have been working in admissions, and I knew with this program coordinator position, I will be working with, you know, first year students, orientation, working with transition and retention. And so I went that route as, you know, opposed to having the title of assistant director just because it sounded good, and the salary kind of matched. I think I actually make more in my program coordinator position versus, you know, the assistant director position I would have taken if I had went into admissions. And so just making sure you're very intentional about your non-negotiables and thinking about where you want to be in terms of like your higher education career. Definitely think about some of those responsibilities and not really get caught up in some of the titles, if that makes sense.
All right, thank you. And I think to just to close out the identity piece that came up in this question, while the community part is important, like also don't diminish the value of having somewhere where you know you can get your hair cut. Like the things that are real important to you. And so I knew for me, it was like, all right, I need to know that I will be able to find, and a lot of that went into like even looking at the folks that were in that department. I'm like, all right, your hair look good. I feel like I can talk to you and have a conversation with you about like where you get your hair done, where you got your nails done. Some folks brought up again, like how close you were to an airport. Like where I can go kiki with fellow queer and Black folks, right? Again, like those are things that are just as important too, and can be considered in your negotiables and your non-negotiable list. And so don't diminish the value of some of those other things that allows you to have your life outside of the role, because again, your well-being and your existence is well more important than the job that you will be doing. So I'm going to go ahead and transition us to the next question, particularly around, so when you were in grad school or as you were transitioning to a new role, how did you engage or create opportunities for you to explore different functional areas as potential careers? And I would add on an additional piece of that, like, did you know that you wanted to do the functional area that you're in right now, like right off the bat? So anyone can start.
For me, I'll go ahead and start because I went the last time. But for me, I kind of knew I wanted to be in the world of orientation. So being a part of NOTA, we know those jobs are few and far between in terms of like how frequent like positions become open, and like kind of Fred mentioned that cycle of student affairs, like basically orientation positions usually open at the end of the summer. So going into the fall semester, well, you know, you graduate in May, you kind of want a job then, but orientation season or peak season, it starts in May. And so I knew what I wanted to do. And so like, just going back to my grad position, I was in student financial aid, which is, people typically don't hear about this. So I started in campus housing, then I transitioned over to student financial aid at the University of Louisville. And I was very intentional about what I needed to do to make sure I land a job in OTR. OTR just stands for orientation, transition, and retention. So I'll just say OTR from here on out. But I knew I wanted a position in OTR. And so within my graduate assistantship, like they were very supportive in me doing professional development. And so they sent me the NOTA. I did the NOTA internship at the University of Alabama. And then also, like for my practicum experience, I worked with parent and family programs and then also Welcome Week. And so I was very intentional about what I did outside of my graduate assistantship position that would land me a position in OTR. So definitely capitalizing off of those opportunities you have at your current institution. And so like if you're in campus housing, but you know you want to be, you know, in student activities, how can you sit on some committees, or can you do some volunteer work to add to your resume to make you more known, or to make your resume fit what you want to do, you know, get into your first role out of grad school. So definitely just make sure you take on not necessarily take on too much, but definitely take on some of those outside activities and committee work, or some committee work that you can do outside of your assistantship, because I think that set me apart from candidates that that apply for the role that I'm in now, because I had some of that expertise in financial aid, and I did some work in parent and family programs, and then I also did some work in the Welcome Week. So don't be afraid to shy off from your assistantship to explore different functional areas while you're at your current institution.
So I can go ahead and say I had no idea. I did not know right off the bat. I was kind of stuck between housing and residence life and like academic advising or like academic support services. I had an assistantship in housing during my graduate program, and I chose to do an internship and practicum in academic advising. And so I was kind of torn between the two. And I know that some graduate programs, they allow you to choose your internship or practicum, but some graduate programs kind of plug you into one. And so I would say if you are in a graduate program that kind of plugs you into one, and you're kind of looking and you kind of have multiple interests, I would say reach out to those offices on your campus that kind of interest you, that you think like, maybe I might be interested in having a career in that, and just network and hold some informational interviews, kind of get their take on what it's like working in their specific functional area. And so, yeah, I definitely think that there are ways outside of just internship and practicum, you know, to gain some experience, whether that's networking, reaching out to the different functional areas within your campus, and things of that nature. So ultimately, I decided to go with housing and residence life because I just felt like that was going to make the most sense for me at the time. So I think when you're doing your job search, it's really kind of figuring out what is going to make you most happy, and what is going to make the most sense for you.
Folks have given great thoughts so far. You know, I also was worked in housing as a graduate student at Clemson, and I had never lived on campus as a commuter student, was feeling super out of my element. But, you know, I used that assistantship experience as an opportunity for me because I wanted to be able, I knew housing professionals have such a strong background. I wanted to walk the walk and talk the talk. But I also knew in the back of my mind that I probably wasn't going to be a res lifer, right? And so using your field experiences, I would challenge you to think of three things particularly. One, what are field experiences, not even just built into your curriculum, right? But like volunteering with TPE, joining a committee with NASPA, right? Like so many different opportunities. One, to challenge yourself. That was the first one that I really did through a conduct internship that I did, right? I was like, I have not had these behavioral conversations, so challenging yourself. Number two, I would say if you have the opportunity to develop something new or contribute meaningfully. At Clemson, I had the opportunity to open a new living learning program for men of color. And I heard that there was a search committee forming to hire a new director for that program, and I wanted to be the first intern for that program and help support it, right? So that is another way you can impact regardless of function. And then number three, use these experiences as a way to identify and also write off potential functional areas. Don't only think about it as functions. You know, one of the areas where I did advancement, like university fundraising and development, was at a small private school. That's how I realized that the small school experience was probably something that I wanted to explore post-graduation.
I will echo everything these incredible three said already. I think that, you know, we say volunteer and find other opportunities, and I know that that's sometimes difficult when you're feeling like you're just keeping your head above the water in the work you're doing, and so I want to acknowledge that. In my grad work, I had talked about, you know, I was in Res Life, I was looking for Res Life. I never thought I'd be in conduct right now, but here I am. And so, you know, life also continues as you're journeying through those first positions and second positions. And, you know, when I was in my first position, I was thinking about what are those volunteer opportunities within my role that get me some experience, education in other ways. So are there ways that you can become a facilitator for another department to do some presentations and trainings? And so I got some, you know, violence prevention work under my belt. Can you volunteer for the university conduct board as a staff member or a graduate representative? And that's slowly how you can start to gain some other pieces there. And then to echo Fred's, what can you contribute and build to? I had the opportunity to help kind of build in some conduct role work in our residence life department, and that sort of gave me the confidence to say, maybe I do have some transferable skills that I can start to talk about in this new functional area search or this hybridized search.
I'm gonna kind of keep us on this particular question that that we're on, because something was brought up, just acknowledging our current landscape and our current climate with relation to COVID-19. What advice do folks have about being able to demonstrate experience within a functional area, but not necessarily being able to actually showcase that due to having an internship either get canceled due to COVID-19, or just acknowledging there's some more limits in the capacity of being able to volunteer and do some of the things that I think were mentioned as suggestions for kind of building up that capacity and doing that kind of informational kind of searching piece.
I would say, and I saw that in the chat as well. I would say take that position description, that job that you are looking at and wanting to get into, and look at what it's asking, like requiring of you for that position, and what experiences do you already have that maybe you can align with that position description so you can speak to that in the interview. And then what pieces are you missing? And maybe now up until interviewing or applying for that position, what are different ways, kind of strategize different ways of how can I gain some experience, whether it is through like volunteer work or committee work or any type of thing that you can gain to kind of help you align with that position description so you can speak to those experiences.
Kirby, that's such a big question, right? And I'm glad we're asking it because we have to acknowledge the landscape of our society right now. We don't know exactly how COVID-19 will transform our profession, but it will 100% will transform the work that we do. And so I think as you think about that position description, and if you're someone that wants to make an impact at that institution, start linking up, right? Read the strategic plans, hear what they're valuing, read presidential statements on how university leaders are responding to COVID, right? Recognizing that if that job is posted, that they have probably gone through a critical exemption process to get that through the door, right? That was a really hard sell for them, because as you all may know, there's lots of hiring freezes and spending freezes across the country. So if you're able to justify that by looking at the bigger picture, talking about not only the work that you've done, but how it contributes to student success, you'll be valued as a thought leader, contributing not only to programs, but to the retention and success of all students. So again, read up on like kind of the big picture, where the university is going, what they said, look at those documents, and really see, are those in line with my values, and can I help the university move that forward, as we all don't know what exactly student affairs will look like on the other side.
And shout out to Connor for actually sharing a resource in the chat. At Florida State's Career Center, they created a guide that provides some tips about highlighting your experiences during COVID-19. So make sure y'all give that a check out, as well as give some credit to Connor for sharing that. I would also encourage folks to don't be afraid of considering non-traditional means of being able to explore different areas of trying to get more information as a way to kind of highlight and sell your experiences. I think particularly with a lot of our associations within student affairs and higher ed, they have also been tasked and challenged. I mean, heck, us as an organization with the placement exchange, we have been challenged with rethinking how to continue to cater to our audience and give them the things that they need. And a number of different organizations have really utilized this virtual platform as a way to continue to engage with their constituents. And so and I know a lot of these places too, a lot of these conferences that would have been high costs to a number of folks, and probably not as accessible for some, depending on what your budget is, are pretty much at this point either low cost or free. And so I would even encourage folks, for example, I know Akuai happening right now actually is having its academic initiatives conference, right? And so if you're looking for some experience, either in the advising realm, learning communities, like those types of things, like that particular platform would be an opportunity to explore, again, through you attending like various sessions, or even again, linking up with the folks who are presenting that information. And that way it gives you some insight too, about some things that you would be getting yourself into as well. All right, so I'm gonna transition us to, yes, thank you, Kirsten, are offering low or no cost sessions. So y'all better take advantage of this free 99 that's out here. Because when y'all become that pro-life, the rate goes up. But with that, I transition us to the next question of, for those who are still in this kind of space of uncertainty. And so it's like, I love all of the things. I consider myself a generalist and have experience in all of the things. What advice or any tips would you have for those folks who aren't quite sure about where they want to go?
I would say start with a pros and cons list, and write down what functional areas like really like stick out to you. Write down some pros and cons, and it goes back to what I said earlier about what's going to make you most happy and what's going to make the most sense. So I know for me, when I was doing my job search and how I kind of solidified, like, okay, I'm going to take the housing and residence life route, was probably because I was like, okay, having this on-campus apartment, knowing that I was wanting to go outside of North Carolina. I know I'm still in North Carolina, but I was trying to get outside of North Carolina, but here I ended up here, still here. It's fine, North Carolina native. But I was like, if I am applying to positions outside of North Carolina, man, that on-campus apartment and having that apartment kind of was a big pro for me. And so just like what makes the most sense for me right now, I know that I really loved housing and residence life. I loved doing it. And I wanted to still give it that shot, and knowing that it provided a lot of different opportunities and experiences, because housing and residence life is like you get a whole bunch of stuff with it. So I really sat down and I weighed out the pros and cons, and just thought about what is making the most sense. And going back to, if you're a generalist and you're like, I like all things, like reaching out to different folks, for real, reaching out to different folks in those different areas that interest you, and networking and speaking with them on, why did you choose this functional area? Like what attracted you to this? And really also asking the hard questions, like what don't you like about this functional area as well? So I would say that.
I would echo what Crystal was saying. And so like for me, like I mentioned earlier, like I'm just very intentional about the future and what I want in terms of like my career in higher education. Given we're in a COVID environment, who knows what that will look like, here in higher ed. But I went back and thought about some of those experiences or some of those skills that I didn't, get out of my assistantship, within financial aid, and how I can make those, or how I can garnish those or make those applicable to something that I wanted to do, in the future, or in my role, to get me to, where I want to be in the future. So like ultimately, I keep saying the future, like ultimately, of course, I want to be like a BPSA, Dean of Students, in higher education. So just being intentional on, getting that retention piece, getting some retention work. So in financial aid, it's like that black and white, where you're working with students to get them, funding, to fund their education. So it really wasn't big on transition and retention and all those different things. And so I was very intentional about, how can I get that experience going into my first grad role, not my first grad role, my first professional role, to make me set up for success for the future. And so just thinking about those skills that I was missing from my graduate assistantship, and writing those down, and looking at different interest areas or functional areas that I think would be an interest of me, and then just asking folks. And so I have a lot of mentors, of course, in the field, and I'm just asking, hey, what worked for you back when you went into, OTR, and what didn't work? Or, how did you feel with being 14 hours away, and different things like that. And so like my mentors was telling me, like, you're young, you're not tied down to a family right now. Like you have the opportunity to go across the country. Like don't set yourself, or don't, well, since you're not location bound, like the opportunities are endless, and definitely explore some of those areas in which you want to experience, and say like, yes, I lived in the Midwest. No, I don't want to go back. Like I want to go back to the South. Like this is the time now to explore all those different options, because like you're in a virtual world now. So like you can have a position where you're working in North Carolina, but you can be employed by a school in California or something like that. And so this is the time now to go ahead and capitalize off of a COVID environment, because we are working remote still, just depending on your position. And so just thinking about some of those things, and some of the interests that you didn't get to receive in your assistantship, and what you can get, or gain from your first role in the field.
I think to touch on what you all said about generalist, specialist, something that we get kind of fixed on is the institutional type that we prefer, right? I was an undergrad at a large public. I went to grad work at a small private, and I was like, I need to get back to a large public. But I never considered the fact that a lot of smaller schools, private or public, have often dual roles, 50-50, or there's at least a certain percentage of their role that is in another department. And so sometimes that's an amazing opportunity for you to say, yeah, I'm in housing, but this is a 50-50 with, outdoor recreation, or, academic advising. And so there's some really neat opportunities to say, I'm willing to go to this kind of school because I'm going to get this really broad experience in a few multiple roles. And so really thinking about is there a way that you can do multiple work in a supportive space? I think the other piece is when you're looking at maybe some of those larger schools where there's a lot of staff, a lot of different units, do they have some structured collaboration opportunities? Do they have collateral positions that they allow you to do? And so asking some of those questions about, are there opportunities for us to engage with other units? Because you know, even if you're uncertain in that first role, getting to try on different things with the support of your department is incredibly beneficial. And so, you know, the last thing I would say is if you're unsure, if you have a lot of interests, think about what drives and sustains you. So I think all student affairs positions interact with students in some way, but, you know, what Tarandik was saying was, you know, that financial support, that, you know, helping them access college. So are there pieces that motivate you in those conversations? Do you enjoy that it's the middle of the night and I'm helping you get through a crisis? Do you enjoy helping outline a 4-year plan with a student? And so there's those pieces of like, wow, I get really excited when I have these conversations, or I love when I can open this door and remove a barrier to access. And if those are those pieces that just drive you, then that sort of leads you down a pathway towards a specific role or a specific department.
Tiffany, I'm so glad you talked a little bit about being a generalist. I mean, if you've ever heard Kevin Kruger, our NASPA president, he has said specialization in student affairs has to end. The future is becoming a generalist, right? And as you all think about your competencies in your work, if you haven't used it in your program, take some time to review the NASPA ACPA competencies. Instead of thinking about functions, like start thinking about like, you know, I'm finding now that a lot of faculty have a lot of anxiety around virtual event planning, right? That is something that, although we're getting more experience, we have experience in program planning and event planning. People are trying to figure out, how do we build relationships in online spaces? Who are the folks that know how to do community building and relationship building? So start thinking about those competencies to help inform your functions later. I would say 2 things that are just good things to remember as you navigate your second year of your master's program. First, really take this time to be authentic, right? Like to really negotiate your values, figure out who you are, reflect on that. You know, while you have this cohort and faculty and this built-in system, when you go out into communities where you may or may not have community, right? What do you need at your core? I highly encourage you to remember that you're still a student. So use student support services, go to counseling, right? You got to pay for it after you graduate and you're no longer a student. But then the other piece that I would say, in addition to being authentic and introspective, is comparison. I mean, I think we can really be devils when we start to compare ourselves to other people in our program. And as we think about in a normal year, right? Like Tarandrik had talked about orientation coming later in the game, right? I can tell you that like we all had anxiety in my program at Clemson when the first cohort member got her job. Now no one cares, right? So looking back, just know that you don't have to compare yourselves. I can tell you as a manager, HR practices have gotten so complicated now. I mean, there's review committees for critical exemptions, looking through all these different signatures and processes. So it's gonna take some time, so don't compare yourself there. And then just remember that if you don't want to talk about your job search, you don't have to talk about it, right? You can kindly tell people, I prefer not to talk about it, right? And I just need some space, like not to talk about job search, right? So create those boundaries, don't compare yourself, and really take this time to be introspective to clarify your values as you head into the job search.
Thank you all for those nuggets of wisdom that you all shared. There's a question that popped up in the chat, particularly around like feeling as though like, how do you break out of an institution type? If that has been like your experience for your either within your program, your GA position, like, do you feel as though there's a way to essentially break out of that mold? And my answer would be yes, but I'll allow y'all to go ahead and talk about that a little bit more.
I think it's really important as we, as you all are reviewing your resumes and looking at your documents to get you in the door, move away from the task and the function and really think about accomplishments, right? When you're able to think about what you accomplish, how you made an impact, how you contributed to something that was towards a department or a strategic goal, that's really where you can move from different institution types, different functions, that sort of thing. I mean, I went from Clemson going to UNC Asheville, right? So Clemson, large public, then down to a small liberal arts university. And so they really wanted to know that I like cared about the individual student, right? That is was what they really believed in holistic development, which is very much in line with student affairs. But the jump for me to go from a 3,000 person school at UNC Asheville to my current school, which is 36, really required me to talk about impact, right? Like, how could I scale up what I did? Because sometimes I think with larger schools and when you're looking at demonstrated impact, they're not sure if you're currently at a small school that you can make that impact, right? So again, talk about accomplishments, how you would work through something to scale it up for that institution.
I would also encourage folks to stop putting yourself in these molds and these boxes, and feeling as though you have to check every single thing off on a position description, or that, like, because you've had only one experience, that you aren't qualified or able to do that work. I think about a number of practitioners that I've had the privilege and opportunity to connect with, who don't have student affairs experience whatsoever and have made their way into this work. And vice versa for those who have looked at transitioning out of the field, and have been able to take all of the experiences that they've had within the field to help them get to that next place that they wanted to be at, right? The job search is really about understanding your positionality, being able to read the environment in which you are going into, and understanding how you can navigate that said environment. I didn't say fit, navigate said environment, right? I think oftentimes there are, you may hear things within the field about like the perfect fit and things like that. There's no perfect fit, right? At all, because we are multifaceted beings. We have various needs, wants, desires, and our values are not going to 100% align in which the places that we are looking to work at all at times, right? And so how do you take a look at who you are and what you have to offer? Don't undermine what experiences that you all have, because that's that thing of self-doubt. That's that thing of imposter syndrome, right? And in the events where an institution is contributing to that self-doubt and that imposter syndrome, ask yourself the question of like, trust that gut feeling of like, red flag, that's not somewhere that I would want to see myself at, right? Because the other thing is too, at the end of the day, you all are looking for your job. This is one job. This isn't going to be the job, and this isn't going to be the only job that you have as you all are navigating your careers. And so I guess to that question again around just the breaking out of the mold or anything like that, like, again, how do you frame the context and Fred just commented about that, like, how do you frame the experiences that you have to the various contexts and environments and climates that you are hoping to get into? So, go ahead, Nick, I see you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Bates. I am also on the TPE steering committee as well. And I currently work at Boston University in the Howard Thurman Center for Common Ground. I just want to say to this question really quick, please, I implore you all as new and emerging professionals into the field, break out of this mold where you believe that the work is significantly different based on the institution type. Foundationally, the work is still the same, no matter the institution type. And this is coming from someone who is on his fourth institution type. It is foundationally, the work is the same. Do you know how to oversee a budget? Do you know how to manage staff members? Do you know how to create a program? Do you know how to sustain a program? All of these things are foundationally similar at all institution types. How we speak about the work may be different at institution types, but foundationally, it's the same thing.
Thank you, my good brother. Thank you, my good brother. Tiffany, go ahead. I see you.
I was just to echo Kirby, you said such beautiful, motivating things. The idea of that self-doubt, that imposter syndrome, anxiety, that will keep you from submitting the job application. And I would just say submit it, right? Get through that paper hurdle. My job search, I was so anxious about getting that paper material application perfect. There is no perfect resume. There's no perfect cover letter. Get someone to review it, but realize that everyone's got their stylistic differences, and just apply. If you're interested, don't apply for things because you just want to play around. But if you're interested and you could see yourself somewhat working there, apply. Just get through that hurdle, because you're going to learn questions that they want to know in those interviews. And I have had interviews where I left it and I said, wow, they will never call me back because I really sounded like I had no idea what I was talking about. But I learned from it, and I knew what questions that maybe a similar position or institution was going to ask, and I grew. And so just, if there's anything I can share with you, just apply if you're interested, and get through that first administrative hurdle.
Allow the institution to tell you no. Don't tell yourself no. As Kirsten just put in the chat, you can't get a job if you don't apply, right? And so I think about my great ancestors, and I think about the things that my mother used to tell me, like, closed mouths don't get fed. And so how do you speak into the universe the things that you want, and pursue the things that you want, and know that just because one door was closed, that doesn't mean that another door won't be open elsewhere.
I want to add one thing on that. It'll be very brief, but don't let these position titles scare you either. Like an assistant director role, you can make more as a program coordinator than an assistant director. So and if it's an assistant director position that you're just really interested in, 9 times out of 10, they just want you to have a bachelor's degree and 2 years of experience, and you can count your grad work as experience. So for me, I was really scared about putting myself out there to apply for certain assistant director positions, but in the end, ended up getting to the second round and different things like that, as a first year coming out of grad school. So don't let the title scare you as well. Just look at some of those requirements and then forget the requirements. The worst they can tell you is no, apply. And then also, this may be shady or not shady, I don't really know, but don't let someone in your cohort, if there's a position and you hear that they want to apply and you're interested as well, you can apply for that position as well. Don't settle just because you feel like your friend are applying and you don't want to be shady. It can come down to where neither one of you get the position, but you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So don't let that scare you as well. And I don't mean it to be shady, but we are trying to get a job here. So that's my piece of advice.
Any final questions from our attendees, or any other final thoughts that our panelists would like to share with the group before we wrap up?
Just one last thing. I saw that Kirsten put the worst they can do is say no to you. Don't be afraid to tell them no as well. Don't be afraid to decline interviews or job offers if they do not best suit you or your needs. So don't be afraid to say no as well.
Yep, you're interviewing them too.
I have a question, if you guys don't mind.
Sure.
So I feel like we live in a time where social justice issues are very important if we make them important. So besides research of that institution, what are correct questions to ask during the interview process to ensure that that institution is going to be one that holds the same values and principles and respects to these topics as yourself?
Panelists, I'll let y'all start because I could take it, but I'm gonna let y'all do it.
Daniel, could you just repeat part of that question? I know you
Yeah,
said
I was gonna
online. You said where else? What kind of questions should you ask?
Right. So during the interview process and the questions that you ask, what are questions that you can ask that's going to ensure your comfortability working for an institution and their social justice issues or ideals and things like that?
Go ahead, Tiffany. You have a thought? I'm trying to, I'm just going to go ahead and let this out. You know, I think the manager is a really big part of your engagement and well-being and experience there, right? And so although the supervisor is not the only piece, the supervisor really is a critical piece, not only for you when you potentially get that position, but to help you in throughout your career, right? As a reference in your further job development, et cetera. I would really start asking the questions about culture, right? Like, what does culture look like in the department? What are the questions between like the manager employee relationship in terms of his or her, their values? Really looking at that piece. You know, I think sometimes we can get caught up by institutional values or division things or where, you know, institutions stand. But a lot of your core as a new and emerging professional is really with that manager and what they value. And so if you're able to clarify work values, relationships, their commitment to development and social justice, I think, you know, your manager is there not only to challenge you, but also to advocate for you. And so I would really encourage you to focus on the manager, especially in this first job search.
I think the other piece around that, manager, is you're going to have some kind of interview. If you get to the next couple of steps in the process, you'll have an interview with someone who's got some power in the department, whether that's an assistant director, associate director, director, right? And so they're going to be people that set the tone sometimes for the priorities. And so being able to ask, what does this support look like? What does this engagement look like? You know, is there a staff of color group that your department supports, right? So some of those pieces of what structurally are they willing to say we support? And you know, they're not gonna be like, oh, you asked this question, we're not going to hire you. But also how they answer that is going to be a very clear tell for you. I've worked as a white person on an all-white leadership team, and if we can't answer how we're going to support someone who doesn't look like us, then we are harming everybody. And so, like, you want to ask them that, and you want to listen and watch how they answer it, because no one's perfect. They're not going to be able to get it perfect all the time, but at least if they're willing to say, we messed up and we want to support people and we want to honor them, you know, that's one of those critical pieces. And then I think what Kirby was talking about with, like, are there amenities in the community that you need? And those are those pieces where informally, when you're at meals, when you're at, you know, on campus or in a panel with, you know, people who will be your colleagues, asking some of those questions in those informal spaces, because they're the ones that are really going to tell you what it's like to move through that institution and navigate those systems in a fairly candid way.
I would encourage folks to interrogate the values and statements. Someone asked a question earlier around the like mission and diversity statements and things along those lines. Really take the time to look at those things, because I think too, with the current, like with COVID-19, we are definitely in a state where a lot of the institutional and structural systems that are in place are being unearthed, although they have already existed. And so don't be afraid to ask those tough questions of, so how do you actually live through these values and not them be a sign of performative allyship? Because you can have this statement on your page, but what does that mean? What does this look like in action? And I know Nick actually put an example of a couple questions that you could ask as well. So don't feel as though the questions that you have to ask have to be in the state of correctness. And students are also the people you want to hear from. Nick just literally put that right there. Values look great on paper, but you want to be able to hear from the folks in which those values are actually impacting or even being represented. So I do want to note that we are at 1:30. I want to give an immense shout out and rounding applause to our panelists, Crystal, Tarondrick, Tiffany, and Fred. Shout out to Nick too for dropping some dimes as well, for just all of the information that they had to share with us today. I'm sure folks are willing to share contact information if that's something that folks would want to do to get connected with them in any way. Before we wrap up, I do want to share a couple of things with you all too. So one, encouraging you all to share the information about applying to be a TPE ambassador. And so if you know of any grad students in your programs that think would be awesome for this amazing opportunity, have them go to the TPE website to apply. Apps are due on Sunday. And then also we encourage you all to join us next time for the next part of our Jumpstart series. So part 3 is articulating your value. I know there are a few questions that came up in the chat around like, so how do I really sell some of the experiences that I have and talk about some transferable skills. We have someone who will be sharing some wisdom with you all, as well as checking out our Making Connections and Next Steps. And then there are a couple of story shorts where you can hear from the lived experiences of practitioners about just various aspects of being an employer or a candidate. And so feel free to check those out as well. And last but not least, continue to connect and engage with us. Follow us on Facebook, like our Instagram, follow us on Twitter, as well as feel free to send us email or visit our website for additional opportunities and resources. And so with that, again, thank you all so much for your time and check us out next week. Take care, everybody. Stay safe, be well, stay hydrated, stay moisturized, wash your hands, wear your mask.